Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our It's on Us, Empowering Voters, One Nonprofit at a Time webinar. My name is Nisha McGee. I serve as Independent Sector's Manager of Advocacy, Engagement, and Mobilization. On behalf of Independent Sector, I would like to extend a warm welcome to our guests and members. However, before we get started, I would ask that you join me in a moment of reflection to respectfully acknowledge all Native American and Indigenous peoples who've lived on the lands that we occupy today. As a descendant of enslaved Africans, Chickasaw freedmen, and Choctaw freedmen, I pay respect to the Piscataway and Nacotchtank people upon whose historical homeland that I'm afforded the privilege to call my own. May this ancient land for all of our relations remind us of the benefits, responsibilities, and relationships we share with all living beings, both human and non-human. Today's session will explore how nonprofits of all sizes can use the nonpartisan voter engagement nonprofit voter empowerment pledge and playbook to tailor voter engagement strategies to meet their organization's unique needs. During this webinar, our panelists will discuss best practices and strategies that nonprofits can seamlessly integrate into their existing programs to expand their investments on nonpartisan voter engagement. We will have a question and answer segment at the end of the program. In the interim, please submit your questions using the Q&A function. It's both an honor and a privilege to introduce our esteemed speakers. Please join me in welcoming Caitlin and Danny with Nonprofit Vote. Feel free to take a moment to introduce yourselves.
Hi, everyone. I'm Caitlin Donnelly, the Senior Program Director at Nonprofit Vote. I use she and they pronouns. I'm really excited to be here today and talk about the pledge and what nonprofits can do to engage voters.
And good afternoon, everyone. My name is Danny Navarro. Been working in civic engagement space for over 10 years. I am here as the Partner Engagement Director for Nonprofit Vote.
Thank you both. So before we kick things off, we do have a polling question for you. Using the polling feature, select the nonpartisan voter engagement activities that your nonprofit has participated in. Please use the chat function to share additional GOTV activities that are not currently listed. Our answer selections are, we have social media reminders, encouraging staff to vote, providing PTO to vote and or volunteer, helping voters register, educating voters about issues at stake, polling places, election rules and procedures, ballot measures, etc. None of the above. This is our first time engaging voters, or other. And we'll give everyone a minute to respond. Okie doke. Let's see what our results are. Okay, so we have 36% social media reminders, 57% with encouraging staff to vote, 21% with providing PTO and or volunteer time off to vote and or volunteer, 36% in helping voters register, 57% in educating voters about the issues at stake or just election logistics, 14% with none of the above. This is our first time engaging voters, and 21% with other. Thank you all for sharing. So before we dive in, I wanted to take a moment to discuss the objective of the pledge campaign in greater detail so that we can better understand what's at stake, particularly as it relates to nonprofit missions, operations, advocacy, and programming. First things first, what is the Nonprofit Voter Empowerment Project? So despite significant strides that the nonprofit sector was able to make in 2020, our services are needed once again as recent changes to the voting process, along with pre-existing barriers and newly enacted policies that could potentially impede access for constituents nationwide. With primary elections underway, we are now forced with the question of who will step in to ensure that communities served by nonprofits can access the voting booth. And if not now, when is a more appropriate time to protect our missions. The Nonprofit Voter Empowerment Project is a nonpartisan pledge that was developed by Independent Sector in partnership with Nonprofit Vote to help nonprofits increase voting rates among their staff, stakeholders, and constituents within the communities they serve in 2022 and in elections to come. So kicking it off into our first question, how many of you know that the benefits of civic engagement extend beyond the outcome of a single election? That's right, voters who are engaged by nonprofits are more likely to volunteer, give, advocate, and inform public policies. However, with so many competing priorities, nonprofits sometimes need help making the case to their colleagues, leadership, or funders to prioritize nonprofit engagement. Let's take a moment to discuss how nonprofits can make the case to their stakeholders by illustrating how this work impacts their bottom line. How does nonprofit voter engagement impact nonprofit missions? More specifically, how does it impact nonprofit missions that are not directly tied to democracy or social justice work? Danny, given Nonprofit Vote's expertise on this issue, I would love to hear your thoughts in response to this question.
Of course, thank you, Nisha. So, folks, we have to understand that, in our work as nonprofits, we're in many ways tied to our democracy, right? And so apart from the issues of enhancing your organization's mission, apart from the fact that, if you engage in voter engagement activities, you pretty much empower your own community to be able to use their voice to be able to push for the changes that are needed in your community, higher turnout, solving issues that, pretty much can only be done by voting. Unfortunately, we do it, unfortunately or not, we do exist in a democracy. And that means that as nonprofits, we are in many ways the bulwark of protecting and defending these communities. We cannot nonprofit ourselves out of this work of solving hunger, of solving issues of homelessness, of solving healthcare issues that exist in our communities if we don't encourage and if we don't assist the people that we are serving to go ahead and vote. And so that's why with Nonprofit Vote, we do provide these resources that the organization has developed for over 10 years. It has special projects that it has been doing, like National Voter Registration Day, in which we're there to empower the community, right? To help them, help the individuals on the ground be able to use their voice, be able to go out and vote. Because at the end of the day, we're not going to be able to solve all of these issues that we have in our community unless we use our voice and use our democracy the way it's intended to be used. And nonprofits do serve as an important bulwark to defend the rights of the community, but also as a promoter of those rights.
Thank you, Danny. That's a really good point. Acknowledging that all nonprofit missions are, directly, tied to policy decisions that are made every day. And the constituents in which we interface with, we can use them and work with them to be able to inform those public policy decisions. And also in turn, as we are, building our own political power and influence, we're teaching them how to advocate for issues, and causes of their choice as well, to advocate on their own behalf and the behalf of their communities. Caitlin, I'd love to hear your perspective on Danny's reflections. What is at stake should nonprofits decide not to engage voters this election cycle?
Thanks, Nisha, and thanks, Danny. Exactly right. The policy impact and our ability as nonprofits to advocate and bring about policies that nurture and support our communities is directly tied to voting. And before I get into what bad things could happen if we don't step up to the plate here, I want to talk about what's possible and what has been done. So I think we have a slide. I pulled this one out from our 2018 field program in particular. We run a program every year with partners in a variety of states. Most of the groups are human service nonprofits for whom it is their first time engaging voters, or, it's just not part of their, stated mission, but they still stepped up. And we saw that the voters they engaged, when you compare them to other voters in their county with the same demographic characteristics, our nonprofit voters had 11 points higher boost in turnout. So there's a pretty clear bump that these voters received. I picked out the 2018 data because it was a midterm year, and we're in a midterm year again. So when we think about what might happen when these hundreds or thousands or tens and hundreds of thousands of voters don't turn out because they weren't engaged at their nonprofit, that can have huge impacts in whether people who support your mission are being elected to office, whether communities are being represented. Voting is really important. Civic engagement goes beyond voting. And so we have things like the census and redistricting that really impact sort of the field that we're all playing in when it comes to voting. But there's no too late. There's no too soon. It's time now to step in if you haven't already, to make sure that the folks that rely on your services or are supportive of your nonprofit are being engaged in the political process and not being left out and marginalized even further.
Thank you. Dana, did you have anything that you wanted to add to Caitlin?
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely. I would just say, I've worked in multiple nonprofits that have served various communities, from with the Latino community, from my own hometown in Miami, in the hunger space as well. And folks, we're not going to be able to solve these issues of representation, hunger, and so on by not encouraging those individuals and the people that we serve to vote. We're not going to. We're going to continue in this feedback loop where we're almost in a state of dependency to our lawmakers of both parties. Oh, please, provide the assistance. And if we don't encourage the people that are actually the ones that we're trying to help to vote, to be better educated about the political process, we're never going to solve the problem. And so I think that there's also there needs to be an understanding in our sector as a whole here in the United States that this is the path forward. It's no longer this continued path of, no, it's too political, we shouldn't be doing this. No, it's really the only way. I think it's also reflective that in other countries that do face these issues within the nonprofit sector, that you do tend to see a correlation between nonprofits that don't encourage civic participation from their constituents with how democratic their societies are. And so if we are indeed really serious about helping the people that we serve and keeping our democracy intact, then this is the time now to encourage more participation, more education of our election system and our democracy to ensure that it exists here for posterity.
Thank you both. I want to take a moment to emphasize on something that both of you guys touched on, specifically the importance of shifting the power back to the people, to the constituents we serve. And specifically, I think, one of the most important aspects of engaging voters in communities served by nonprofits is that it ensures that elected officials are accountable to both nonprofits, our organizations, and our constituents, both during and after an election cycle. We know that research indicates that elected officials are more likely to engage communities that have higher turnout rates. So by ensuring that all of our constituents, regardless of their political affiliation, can access the voting booth and access their ballots and engage in constituent input, engaging in democracy and civic participation as a whole, it helps to ensure that they are going to prioritize our work and that our work that helps to fulfill the needs of the communities we serve. And if we don't, engage them, then that's definitely, I think, one of the biggest things that's at stake that we risk losing. So just to make certain that nonprofit priorities remain, at the forefront of elected officials and to ensure that they are accountable to us and the communities we serve, that is possibly one of the most important reasons that we should continue to educate and engage voters regularly, both during an election cycle and outside of it. Moving on to the next question, which is, it's perfect. So looking back at 2018, I would like to discuss some of the lessons learned from 2020, specifically to get your opinions and thoughts and insights on how we can protect sector gains and build upon our success, So specifically, I'd like to take a moment to discuss the voting policies and practices that were an integral part of our success in 2020. These insights may be helpful to help nonprofits better understand how they can leverage proactive voting policies to optimize turnout. So as we know, when voters are afforded expanded options to cast their ballot, they turn out in numbers that we hadn't seen in over a century. Nonpartisan voter education campaigns and advocacy campaigns, largely led by nonprofits during the 2020 election, focused on how voters can use accessible voting procedures nationwide. That said, which voting policies were most effective in increasing access and participation? Caitlin, I'll let you answer this one. Take the first.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of change over the past several years, but actually the change has been going on for over a decade, and we've seen the expansion of policies like automatic voter registration. So that's, you go to the DMV and, you can register right there on the spot by checking a box. Or online voter registration, which I know has made it much easier for me to be updating my registration when I move around because I'm a renter. So there has been overall a lot of good forward progress on making our elections more accessible. And of course, in 2020, in light of the pandemic, there was much more that had to happen and a lot more of voting by mail. And voting by mail or absentee voting absolutely plays a role in increasing turnout. We see that in some of the states that have vote by mail elections where, voters are automatically sent ballots so long as their registration is up to date. And they have the time to fill that out at home, send it back. No onerous requirements around witness signatures or notaries. Those states have higher turnout than states with more restrictive policies. So we do see where there is same day or election day registration, easier processes to vote by mail. There's a lot more voting. So you see that every state from our study of 2020 turnout, the top 10 had at least one of these policies, voting at home or same day registration. Some of them had both. And then if I were to show you a graph of the states with the lowest turnout, you'd see there's like a 15% difference. And those states are more likely to have more barriers to voting by mail and a longer deadline that's earlier. And so a lot more time elapses between when you need to be registered and when you would actually turn out to vote. So policy plays a big role, but I don't want to discount the fact that whether you're in the most restrictive states or the most accessible states, are still gaps where lower income people, younger people, communities of color are not being represented equally to others in their state. So there's still gaps no matter what state or what policies you have. So there's still a role for organizations to play.
Thank you. So just to clarify, whether you are in a state that has recently implemented some policies that make it difficult to vote, or whether you are in a state that has some of the best proactive voter policies, nonprofits still need to show up and educate their constituents on how they should vote, when they should vote, best practices that they can use and leverage, how they can help others vote, etc.
Absolutely.
Danny, did you have anything that you wanted to add?
Really, the only other item to add here is that as nonprofits, you do have this responsibility, I would argue, of keeping your elected officials accountable, right? So when these elected officials are changing the rules to make it more difficult for your constituents to go and participate in the voting process, you should be speaking up in this regard. Again, going back to my earlier point of, if we're going to maintain this democracy, it cannot be maintained if we have millions of Americans struggling with food insecurity, with millions of Americans struggling with homelessness, millions of Americans struggling with healthcare. We're not going to be able to maintain this democracy. And I think that, it's almost like sounding the alarms in many ways. But unfortunately, our society might have been getting a little bit too complacent in the nonprofit sector. And, okay, we're just going to try to solve this way without promoting civic participation. And now that we're seeing that pathway really has not resulted in what we need fixed, especially with COVID appearing, right? Especially with the whole new world of social media and misinformation, and not, instead of encouraging civic participation and faith in our democracy, discouraging it, right? And so needing to reinforce those values of an inclusive democracy, of participating in every possible election, right? Not just a national, but as we've been talking about, state voting rules, right? That happens at the state level. Talk with your local elections office, right? To see if your nonprofit can host or help find a location to host a polling place that is more accessible for your community. So even those little changes on the local and state level can have massive impacts to voter turnout.
That's a really good point to transition into our next question. So, plain and clear, a nonprofit's ability to advance our missions hinges upon our constituents' ability to cast their ballot in every election. Every election matters. So talking about or transitioning from the policy side, I would love to discuss some strategies and solutions that nonprofits can deploy to achieve some of the objectives that we just discussed. Nonprofit advocates have raised concerns about a lot of the policies that you guys just named that may limit or impact voter participation or turnout. What's an easy first step that nonprofits can take to transform their concern into action? Danny, I'll let you answer that one first.
I think you have to, definitely the easiest way is to start within your organization, right? Find the ways that your organization can become more voter friendly, democracy friendly, right? If that is changing your organization's PTO rules and your HR department to be to allow your staff to go and vote and or help run the local elections in your community, to, again, like I just suggested earlier, right? Work with the local elections office to either host as a polling site or help find a location that's going to be suitable for the constituents that you're serving. If your organization has the capacity, which I will admit, not every organization can do all of this work. So find the work that best fits to your organization's current standing, current bandwidth and resources and so on. But if your organization's larger and you have a bit more of a pool, let's just say, in your community, start advocating for friendlier policies, right? Again, with your elections office, with your local city, county commissioners, to make voting more accessible, right? If that's resources to provide more rides to the polls, right? Promote the fact that you need staff to run the elections, right? I think that's actually another aspect of this work that a lot of people forget. A lot of the people that are running your local elections are from your community, and they are in constant need of volunteers, of people that, they offer stipends to work at those elections. So people that are, especially from low-income communities, any dollar counts. And so that would be an easy an effective way to encourage more participation that is not necessarily just go vote. It's also help run the elections, build that faith in the system itself. So in that way, you don't have this corrosiveness that unfortunately has been gripping our system in the last couple of years, if not decades, of mistrust in the process, right? Can't really mistrust the election system when your neighbor was literally the one managing the roles, right? So there's a little bit of community growth there and community empowerment that can be achieved, that does not require you lobbying to Washington, lobbying to your state legislatures, even for that matter, if it's too much of a work. Start local and grow from there.
Thank you. So to answer my own question, I guess the easiest first step that nonprofits can take to do this kind of work is to take the nonprofit voter empowerment pledge by committing to engage in nonpartisan voter engagement activities that support the existing policies that increase voter turnout participation. Does that sound right? Caitlin, is there anything you wanted to add?
Well, I was going to say that that's what I love about the pledge and the playbook is that it breaks everything down really well. And that I know that everyone who is signing on is going to receive lots of information with free resources, materials, and initiatives to make stepping into the voter engagement space a little easier. I think there's a really thriving community and ecosystem of nonprofits and resources dedicated to bringing more organizations into this space. And so I love that the pledge is working to highlight those, and the playbook, references a lot of them and has those easy steps for any nonprofit that's new to this work, because it can feel daunting, just like voting can feel daunting if you don't know the process, you don't know how to look up your polling place, or that you need to look up a polling place. So there's a lot of information that our organizations can share. And I think the pledge is a good way to get connected if you don't know where to start.
That's a good point. And I think even those who do, we can always expound upon our work and strengthen it and build a more robust voter engagement strategy. And I think you're absolutely right, Caitlin. The playbook makes it accessible for everybody, every nonprofit, regardless of your expertise, regardless of your experience, regardless of your capacity. There is something in here for everybody, and you can, use it to customize your own plan, doing what works for you. You don't have to do anything new. You don't have to go and, develop, something entirely, new or reinvent the wheel. You can take this playbook, take the resources that we're providing, the information that we're sharing from our partners, the tools, and streamline that into your existing nonprofit services and programming with the constituents that you interface with every day. Really good points. So transitioning into our next question about the playbook. So some nonprofits may view nonpartisan voter engagement as a trade-off. However, research indicates that one of the most impactful ways that nonprofits can advance their mission is through voter engagement. Integrating nonpartisan voter engagement into an organization's existing program and services can be easy and seamless. It is not a zero-sum game, but a both-and approach. Let's discuss how implementation factors into this work. Emily, if you could please pull up the slide with the voter engagement plan. Danny, if you could please tell us about starting with education. What are some opportunities for nonprofits to consider nonpartisan voter engagement in the earliest stages of developing a voter engagement plan?
All right, thank you, Nisha. So really what we have here set up here on the slide is pretty much a timeline of certain activities that you could be doing as we go through this process, right? With any voter engagement plan, you definitely cannot start late, right? Because unfortunately, people need constant reminders to not only remember the fact that there's an election going on, but it's all about customer service in that respect, right? You're helping people out to go ahead and vote. And so right here with our voter engagement plan, the pledge campaign will focus on the following themes as we go through the months. Right now, as we're ending June, we're ensuring that nonprofit staff can vote and volunteer. So if your organization has a PTO plan in place that allows for staff to go out and vote and or run their elections, great. Make sure that everyone in the organization knows about it. That way they can start booking their PTO. That way they can start making their plans to go ahead and vote and help run the elections as well. Moving on over to July, it's all about improving accessibility for voters in underserved communities. Now, unfortunately, and I have seen this in my work doing elections work and in the various spaces I've worked on, it's unfortunately one of the most overlooked, not only overlooked communities, but one of the most overlooked problems during elections is, is the polling site accessible? Are people that have issues with accessibility able to get to the polls? So make sure that, whatever work that you can do on that front, we can go ahead and make sure that folks know about how to get to the elections to the election sites, but then also what else can we do to advocate for this community to be able to go ahead and vote in an accessible manner that works for them. Moving on to August, working on the theme of registering voters in communities served by nonprofits. So again, kind of coming back to that, to the work of, how can your organization assist voters in this important space, right? And so apart from, ensuring that you're providing the right information, I would view it's also about, customer service, right? Making the process as easy, as stress-free, as less fear as possible. The more you can do that for your for the individuals that you serve in your communities, the better people are going to feel about the process. Even in states that do have more complicated rules, there's still a space for your organization to ease the tension, right? To ease the stress and encourage people to go and vote. Encourage that it's the right thing to do, that it's totally what within their rights to do so. September, educating voters and communities. So again, it kind of goes with registering is only just the first process, right? Don't assume that just because you're registering the person to vote, they're going to automatically remember that there's an election in November. That is not always going to be the case. So you want to make sure that you're that conversation. This is not, this take constant work. Moving on from August to September, okay, we helped you register to vote or update your information. Now let's get you educated. What are the times that you can go vote for early vote and so on? Which then, as you see, there's a pattern here, right? It moves on to October, helping your constituents to you serve by voting early and vote by mail. So if those deadlines are coming up in October, you want to make sure that people have that information in mind. And then moving on to November, thinking more about post-election. That's right. So the process doesn't end on election day on that Tuesday. Now we have to think about, well, who were the, what were the results of the election, and what does that mean for the individual to continue to participate in the process, right? Because a lot of the attention tends to focus on the national election, right? What happened in Congress, what happened here in DC, but we also need to turn it around and say, well, hey, there was local elections, there were state elections, there was county commissions. So making sure that individuals don't lose sight of the entire democracy picture, right? A lot of the decisions that are going to affect their day-to-day lives happens at the local level, not so much at the national level. And so encouraging folks to keep that in mind, right? When are the next city, county, the city commissioners meetings, school boards, which is extremely important. Those types of local engagements to help people develop this culture of civic engagement. That's how you're going to be able to encourage a lifelong, maybe not commitment is the right word, but a lifelong activation into the democracy to help improve their communities.
Thank you, Danny. That's a really good point. And more specifically, in November, developing a post-election engagement plan like that, not only for constituents, but more so for nonprofits. How do we, ensure that nonprofits are sitting at the table when policy decisions are made? How do we make certain that our expertise is considered in the earliest phases of policy development to be able to inform the decisions and policies that impact our operations and the communities that we serve? It's a really good point. And I also want to make clear that we do have flagship partners. These are some democracy organizations, and a lot of them are nonprofits, that are very similar to yours, that have been doing this work, and they have a ton of resources, and we're actually creating some, new resources, co-creating some things that we will be sharing with you guys monthly to help you complete your voter engagement plans. So activities, examples, case studies, tailor-made content that you can plug and play, templates, social media graphics, educational materials, things that you can customize for your own communities and your own targeted audiences. We will be sending these things regularly so that this can be an easy and seamless process. So if you have not developed a voter engagement plan and you're starting to do so, you will have full support in being able to do so. And if you do have a voter engagement plan and you're looking to strengthen it or expound upon it, again, there's something for everybody. Caitlin, did you have anything that you wanted to add to this?
Yeah, actually, lest anyone feel daunted by, all the work that Danny listed, the pledge is here with resources to make it as easy as possible. Danny referenced paid time off to vote. We have sample policies. We want to make it as easy as copy and paste. There is one piece, and we can help with this too, with messaging and data and reports, but really getting buy-in, I think, is the first step internally for any organization. So making sure that your leadership, your board, your staff, volunteers or other key supporters, funders or donors also see the importance and value of doing voter engagement work and really getting them on board and excited. That's critical to any effort having longevity and sustainability, but it also just makes the work easier. It means more people at your organization are engaged. And we certainly want to make sure that nonprofit staff are voting. We are a sector employing like 11 million people. So it's very important that we are also turning out to vote. But I really think that buy-in. And so finding, whatever message is going to really break through. There are a few that I sort of come back to all the time because I'm hearing them from nonprofits. You might, think that voting is most important for your organization because it's going to benefit your clients' social connections and personal agency. So you're in it for their, the individual's benefit. You might be doing voter engagement because the voices of the people you serve are often left out of the policy decisions that impact their lives and their ability to thrive. It might be to demonstrate that you're active in voting and you're influencing legislation and elected officials, and it's a part of your advocacy efforts. And you could approach this work from a diversity, equity, and inclusion lens where we all have a responsibility for making a more inclusive democracy. These are just a few examples. Find the one that really resonates with your organization so that you can come back to that and it can ground you and keep that work moving forward because you have a really clear picture of why this is so important to your organization, and make sure everyone is really on the same page around that.
Thank you both. You mentioned something that I think is very important, acknowledging that nonprofits already have, the built-in assets, whether it's, trust within our community. We are nonpartisan. We engage with these people and interface with them regularly. The nonprofit sector being the third largest employer and having, the most diverse workforce and engaging some of the most diverse communities. We already have, reach within these communities. We already have an apparatus in play that makes us uniquely qualified to do this work. So if you, haven't done this work, fear not, you already pretty much have everything you need to be able to do this work effectively. Caitlin or Danny, could you tell us a little bit about the nonprofits get out the vote data, specifically in how nonprofits, speaking from an equity perspective, and that is something that all nonprofit missions we're all working, to achieve. Specifically how nonprofits were able to narrow and close the gaps in participation among minority communities who are often or historically disenfranchised.
Yeah, so the slide I showed at the beginning with the 11 percentage point jump, that's one example. Our study from 2020 showed that when we looked at the data, we saw that especially where people were at intersections of marginalization. So when we looked at, I can't remember exactly the groups, but I want to say it was like Asian American voters that did not have a college education or a college degree. We actually closed the gap between them and their counterparts that did have degrees. So we're seeing concrete gains and we're seeing gaps closing as a result of nonprofits being engaged. We know that the more touches and reminders that voters get, the more significant the impact is. So that's why, as Danny said, you want to keep talking about voting, making voting visible all year round, especially through the summer and fall leading up to these elections. But primaries are often just as impactful and sort of in some places basically determine the outcome of the fall election. So you want to engage voters at all of those. And we find that nonprofits have the biggest impact in the lowest turnout elections. Not surprising. When you have an election with a really low turnout, that means there are tons of people that you could influence and encourage to actually turn out to vote and cast that ballot. So every election is a great opportunity, but especially these midterms, primaries, and any local elections, you can have huge increases. I think we had 11 percentage points in 2018. Our overall, I think, was 7 or 8 percentage points in 2020 because it's a high salience presidential year, but we see closer to 20 percentage point bumps in those lower turnout local elections. So it's striking the gains that voters can have when their nonprofits step up and really engage them as voters, provide the information about the process, the importance, and connect people with resources, whether that's a ride to the polls or the election protection hotline.
It's a good point. And so by rising to the challenge again, nonprofits, we can replicate what we were able to do in 2020. And I also want to emphasize the point that you made about the intersections, little context, specifically with intersectionality and the nonprofit community. We know that a lot of people who are members of marginalized communities usually hold more than one identity, and those identities intersect and compound in very dynamic ways. And nonprofits, acknowledging our frequent engagement with the communities we serve, we are, again, uniquely qualified to be able to meet these unique needs for voters who otherwise would be further marginalized. So I think that the stakes are even higher, acknowledging that a lot of the communities we serve have they have intersectional identities. So our work is more important now than ever because the stakes are higher. Danny, did you have anything that you wanted to add before we move on?
Yes, I would say two points here. So one, I know that we published a report earlier this year, America's Nonprofits Get Out the Vote, and that data found that among nonprofits that are led by people of color and other marginalized communities and pretty much the entire BIPOC community, they are more likely to be promoting voter engagement activities to their communities than their non-BIPOC counterparts. So there is something there to be said about how if you happen to be a non-BIPOC in leadership of a nonprofit and you're not conducting voter engagement activities, that would be a point of reflection that we would suggest that you take a look and see why that is not the case. What are the policies potentially in your organization that are either preventing that, or just no one has brought that issue up, especially if you're serving in a marginalized community. The whole point is to help those individuals be empowered and get out to vote in that process. And then, reflecting back in my 10 years in my career working in voter engagement from Miami to Arizona to Georgia and so on, there's always this belief, unfortunately, that I've seen among many nonprofits that, how come, isn't that the work of the political campaigns, to go out and get people out to vote? I've worked in political campaigns myself, and the short answer is no. The main objective of a political campaign is to win the election. That means that they're going to dedicate the short amount of resources and time that they have to voters that consistently vote according to their data. That means that they're not going to spend their time reaching to communities that are what we consider low propensity voters or voters that don't vote every time, which then as a result creates this negative feedback loop of, well, if you don't reach out to those communities that don't consistently vote because they don't have that information, they won't go out and vote. And so then the next campaign that comes around to your community doesn't engage those voters. because they didn't vote in the last campaign, and so on and so forth and so forth. So that is why it's on us as nonprofits in our sector to go and encourage those individuals to vote, because you are the ones talking to your community every single day, not the campaigns, not any other political action committees or so on. Take it from myself, I haven't worked in that space. I can tell you our mission back in the day when I was in that space was to win, not to necessarily to empower. And that's unfortunately a sad reality, but that's why as nonprofits, we're here to empower our communities. And that's why it's on us to make that work happen.
Thank you. And talk about preaching to the choir. That is exactly why the campaign is called It's on Us. It's because it is on nonprofits. And the entire concept is to empower our communities and to empower nonprofit organizations who are trusted and reliable sources of information to be able to do this work. So the Pledge and the Playbook are two of the most viable resources to help you in those efforts. So we do have a final polling question before we move on to our question and answer segment. So of the options below, and feel free to select all that apply, which would be most helpful for helping to create or implement your voter engagement plan? Case studies on voter engagement at nonprofits, data on need, reach, and impact of voter engagement activities, social media assets and guidance, recommendations on how to work with specific populations or communities, volunteer opportunities and one-off events, connections to nonprofits facilitating voter engagement work locally. Help us help you. What are some additional tools and resources as our partners and flagship partners are working every month to create, curated content to help you build out your plan? What resources could we build out or provide that would be most helpful and beneficial in supporting your efforts to increase participation among your stakeholders, staff, and in the communities you serve? Give everybody a moment to answer. Okay, Emily, can we pull up the results? So 40% case studies on nonprofit voter engagement. We have plenty of those in the works. Data on need, reach, and impact, 80%, wow. 53% social media and guidance, 67% recommendations on how to work with specific populations and demographics, 20% on volunteer opportunities and one-off events, 47% on connections to nonprofits facilitating voter engagement work, 60% curated content templates, marketing items, let's see, and 13% other. And if you did select other, please drop your answers in the chat. I do have great news. Your resource guides and campaign newsletter and our partners, you're going to get all of that and then some. So I think we are headed in the right direction. And for those who are already doing this work, if you've created some content that you feel can be seamlessly integrated into the campaign, please feel free to reach out to myself or my colleagues at Nonprofit Vote. We would love to be able to use the campaign to amplify your work. So turning it in, let's gonna transition over to our Q&A segment. We're going to open up the floor for questions. Please use the question and answer function. And also in the interim, while we're answering questions, Emily, if you could please go ahead and drop the post-event survey link. And if you could please take 2 minutes to complete it. So transitioning to questions. Okie doke. So my organization remains short-staffed following the pandemic. Even though we know this work is needed to serve our constituents and staff, it's going to be difficult finding the bandwidth to do it. What resources or shortcuts should we consider this year to lighten the load of implementing nonpartisan voter engagement work this year? Who wants to take this one first? My short answer is going to be take the pledge and use the playbook, because that will definitely help to increase organizational capacity to do this work. But I'm going to let my colleagues chime in.
I absolutely agree. If you start with that, you'll start receiving the newsletters with materials that are very easy to integrate. So one example, Nonprofit Vote puts out an election countdown calendar. So starting 12 weeks before the election, We provided an array of messages, another copy paste situation where you can put them on your socials. We have, copy for emails or newsletters or Zoom events. So you're just integrating it into your existing activities. We don't need you to act like a campaign and go door knock or canvas. We want you to engage the people who are already interacting with you. So including some of those messages into your existing interactions is a great way to engage voters. It takes a little bit of training for staff to know that they should do that. We have state fact sheets. You can also go to vote411.org, the website of the League of Women Voters, has a lot of great information on the process of voting so that you can inform staff and inform clients or community members that you serve.
Thank you. Danny, do you have anything you want to add?
No, that's pretty much straightforward as you can get. Don't overthink it. It would be my answer. As Caitlin said, we're not asking you to be a full functioning campaign. Start small. Rome wasn't built in a day. Same thing here. Our voter engagement culture is not built in one day. Start small, start within your organization, and then go from there. And you're going to see that those, that's going to rub off on people's shoulders. That's going to rub off into the community little by little.
Great points. And I will say that several of the flagship partners that we are working with, they are, some of the services that they provide, they are, willing to work with you guys and provide services free of charge to nonprofits that include printing and shipping. So, you can seamlessly integrate these, voter information cards or door hangers, things of that nature in your services. So if you're the food pantry, you can take these cards and slip it in a bag. Scripts, templates, emails, toolkits, you name it. Everything you could possibly need will be included in the resources that we will be providing in this campaign. Next question we have, is please talk more about how to reach the folks in the middle when the extremists on both sides are the loudest.
I would say don't approach this work with that lens of politics on it, right? I think that especially for a lot of folks that we're serving in our communities that that haven't been participating in the political process, that are marginalized, what you're going to find more often than not is my vote doesn't matter, my vote doesn't count anyway, so why bother? That's the hurdle that you're going to have to overcome in terms of trying to encourage people to vote. This is why your organization also has to hold the politicians on all levels accountable for their actions as well. So you're going to be walking through this process with individuals. I wouldn't, in terms of reaching the folks in the middle, I think you're already assuming a lot of things about the community that you're serving. And instead, I would approach it as purely educational, right? Remember, we have to keep the nonpartisan component to this work. So if by doing this, you're already assuming some people are going to vote left, some people are going to vote right, that is not going to be an effective way to communicate and to connect with your community. Walk together, get to the polls together, and encourage that civic and democracy building together, instead of start trying to identify who I should talk to first.
Caitlin, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Definitely trying to find common ground. And I typically recommend that instead of focusing on hot button issues that are talked about in the media a lot, you make it much more about people's daily lives, and especially about the services that government provides, whether that's roads and sort of infrastructure things, education, could be minimum wage, could be Medicaid, could be any sort of service they're using, or public safety, anything that they do have opinions on. And it's not that you need to get into political discussion, but it's making that connection for people that, yes, the people they elect, they vote for and are elected, they make appointments, they make legislation, they control budgets, and really do have an impact on our lives as individuals and our communities and neighborhoods. So tuning them into, their vote isn't just for a person, but it can be about a service that matters to them. I think that's really, really more compelling and breaking through, talking about issues that of course are really impactful, but come with a lot more baggage.
Thank you. That's a really good point. And specifically talking about, nonprofits. You are absolutely correct in terms of, these policy and appropriations decisions impact our constituents, but they also impact our programming as well, acknowledging that nonprofits have long been and will continue to be, the sector that fills in the gap that the private sector and public sector cannot meet. We are often required to do a whole lot more with a whole lot less. So to ensure that we can fulfill our missions, this is why this work is, it's incredibly important that we continue to do this, year round. We have time for one more question. Our organization is using a ABCD approach that is resident led and bottoms up. How can we engage residents in leading these efforts so they have ownership? Also noted that it's also in place based.
So I was just referencing services over issues. And, I really got that concept from this great tool by the Right Question Institute. They have a why vote tool, and it's a worksheet, asks people to identify the services that matter most to them, and takes them through some questions to help them really think about what do I need to know about voting? Why does it matter to me? And so I would really recommend using those kinds of tools to spark discussions and facilitate interactions so people can get in touch with their own sort of why. And then from there, really listen to your residents. What do they think is going to be effective? Do they want to use this tool and reach out to other people, other residents, or form events, working groups? I'd be put it back to them to determine how they want to solve that problem. But the tools from the pledge, those resources and information are going to make this much easier and more accessible, so they can spend more time talking with their peers and other residents and less time looking up regulations on the state elections department. We did that hard work for you.
Thank you. We are at time. However, I did see Manuel's question about vote and volunteer programming. I will say the resource guide that you will receive for this month has an array of great recommendations that your nonprofit can adopt to enhance or even implement or modernize your vote and volunteer organizational policies. So with that said, on behalf of the independent sector, Nonprofit Vote, we would like to thank our speakers for taking time to share their insights today. Nonprofit voter engagement is not a zero-sum game, but a both-and approach. And again, by rising to the challenge, nonprofits can further their missions by implementing voter engagement strategies to support existing policies that have a proven real-world track record of increasing voter turnout. Thank you all for tuning in today and for your continued support. Feel free to reach out with any questions. Thanks again and have a great weekend.